Well, hello there. Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools. On today's episode, if you want to see how we completely transform this old, sad walkway from this to this, if you want to know how to do it, keep on watching. Let's get started.
On this project, we start with this overgrown walkway that really doesn't look like a walkway at this point. It looks more like a wilderness jungle that all of a sudden approaches our beautiful deck in our backyard. But I envision a beautiful transformation in this space. We just need to get all these bushes cleaned up. Which of course is extremely easy and quite satisfying if you have a gas-powered hedge trimmer like this, which makes quick work of any overgrown bushes. But now that our space is fully cleared out and cleaned out, it's time to do some layout. There are a number of things we could do with this space, but because it's a bit of a unique space, I wanted to be a bit more creative with the flow of our walkway, which all starts with a string line, of course. I lay out 2 string lines to determine the overall flow of this entire space. In order to determine the general flow, I do account for the width throughout the entire area, making sure that it's approximately 32 inches wide, and I'll explain why 32 inches is so key later on in the video. Prior to removing our string lines, I do take some marking exterior spray paint to ensure our shape is accounted for during the installation process of our footings. Since this walkway is going to be matching our low-profile deck, I want to ensure that we have a very structurally sound and well-supported walkway, and that all starts with the footings that support our walkway framework. And in order to make sure that we have proper support, I want to space our footings 36 inches apart from each other, which is plenty of structural support for a walkway like this. A traditional cement block won't work in this application because it's so low to the ground, and I don't want to be drilling and digging into this soil because I know it's so tough with roots, which is why I have the perfect solution for a low profile walkway like this.
This is Tough Block, and this is an installation foundation system that takes the replacement of a traditional deck blocking system. Now, the beauty about this system is that it can take multiple different sizes of lumber, whether it's a 4x4 or any type of joist aspect needed to take the weight of over 1,700 pounds with just one block. Now, they are the sponsor of this week's video, and if you want to see how you can get 20% off this amazing system, stay tuned until the end. Let's get them installed.
This Tough Block system is made by Build Tough, and they're actually made with 100% recycled plastic. I have a link in the description box below if you want to check them out for yourself, but in the meantime, let's take a look at how we get them installed. I use the Tough Block as a template to mark my excavation area. Now, when I say excavation area, it's extremely minimal. All I'm doing is going down a couple inches to remove all of the vegetation and get down to a proper substrate. Once I clear out all these areas for my footings, it's time for proper compaction. Now, I'm just taking a steel hand tamper and just tamping this area down. But I do want some proper drainage underneath these Tough Blocks, which is why I pour in 2 to 3 inches of crushed rock. I also tamp this crushed rock down in order to have proper compaction and then place my Tough Block right on top. Now, it's not going to be perfectly leveled the very first time, which is why you just needed to give it a little bit of a shimmy in one direction or the other to get it perfectly level. Once you're level, you can move on to your next Tough Block. The beautiful thing about this system as well is that you don't need each one to be at the exact same height either, which is why a laser level comes into play at this point. I place the level where I want the top of my framing to be. That accounts for the thickness of the decking boards, so we have a perfect transition from our walkway to our deck. During the installation process, I did realize there were a couple high spots which I did have to excavate a little further than the others. Unfortunately, of course, the one area where I had to excavate further, there was a nice large root in my way, which I did take care of quite quickly with my trusty reciprocating saw. Once the root was out of there and excavation was accounted for, we poured in our crushed rock, tamped it down properly, make sure our footings were properly level, and once those were taken care of, I decided to start cutting our 4x4 posts, which were extremely easy to account for because all I had to do is take the measurement that was being highlighted with our laser level. This also accounts for the height variance between footing to footing, which makes determining the level process extremely easy. Once I have each 4x4 cut properly, I bring it over to our tough block, insert it right on top, and make sure we have true level, because we all desire true level in life, right? Or at least balance. Yeah, we'll go with that and moving on to the next set. I do the same process over and over and over again until we get to the very end and we have all of our footings accounted for. And of course, the best feeling of all during the framing process is to put a large level from post to post and to double check and make sure everything is level. If it is, great, and luckily for us, we did things right and it was perfectly level the very first time. All the lumber I'm using on this project is pressure treated Douglas fir. However, especially with these 4x4s, it doesn't soak all the way into the wood, and therefore anywhere that we cut, we want to make sure we apply a secondary layer of pressure treated solution. This is a very simple step that takes just a couple minutes to do and in all honesty is normally skipped. However, if you want to guarantee longevity, you don't want to skip simple steps like this. After all of our footings are accounted for, I grab some weed barrier and apply that to this area first, because especially on low profile decks and walkways like this, it's very common to see weeds growing through if you don't provide some type of weed barrier prior to installing our decking. Now that we have our weed barrier taken care of, we can move on to the rest of our framing. And all that consists of is 2x4s. This is plenty of support for a walkway like this, and the fact that our spans are maxed out at 36 inches apart means that the span load on this walkway is going to be very minimal, especially with the amount of framing we're going to be doing for this walkway. Each set of footings are going to be connected together, and in order to make it easy, I do clamp them down first, and then use my framing nailer to nail each board in place. After it's nailed, I do double check just to make sure that we have true level still, and as long as we still have level, we can continue on to the next one. These two clamps really do make it a lot easier for installation purposes and lining up, but it also provides a safety barrier for your hands because your hands aren't there to try and hold up the wood, which is great when you're accounting for 16 penny galvanized nails, which is what we're using in this framing nailer. For each board, I'm generally striking 4 nails into each post, guaranteeing that this is going to be structurally sound and fully secured with those. I do have to make some slight adjustments based upon the length of our 2x4s, but they're generally 27 inches wide. After I have all of these sections accounted for, we can now move on to our side framing. Now this framing is going to be connecting each adjacent footing run together, which of course is important because our decking has to lay upon something, but it also provides stability and strength for our walkway because this means that the entire system is one fluid system and connected together. I do double check our levelness just to make sure that nothing was moved during the installation process of our previous framing, but since we've been diligent about our 4x4 posts being level, this was a very easy process and all I had to do is line it up at the very top of each 4x4 post. I count for the thickness of our 2x4 and then make my mark in the dead center between the two. That's why you see the little mark off center of our 4x4 posts. Cutting our lumber in more smaller manageable sections also make it easier to maneuver its unique shape all the way around this walkway. I did tag a 2x6 at the very end to give it more of a professional look and feel, and just know there's an existing concrete patio that's right at the very end of this walkway that we'll be making over in a future video, of course. Where our walkway meets up with our existing deck, we do have some trim boards that we have to account for, and to make a nice even notch on the end of this board, I use my multi-tool to cut a perfect angled slice. This lays flush against our deck, but it also lines up with our 4x4, which is going to give us the best structurability possible at this location, which is exactly what we want at this transition location. I do tag a few nails into the existing deck just to tie the entire system together, as well as attach some blocking to the very edge of our deck, which you can see right here. The inside span between our side rails is approximately 24 inches, which is just too large of a span without having a little bit more blocking, so I did put a center rail in each individual panel section. I offset each section to make sure I was able to properly nail both sides of the 2x4 and proceeded to make my way down the entire walkway. This was a quick and easy add, and I do feel like it provided a lot more stability and strength when it finally came time for decking. But before we get to decking, we need to do a little bit more waterproofing. This is G-tape, and it's just a waterproof membrane that you place right on top of your joist or any of the other lumber that you want to protect from moisture. And this is another step that is not necessary, but it really does add longevity to the entire project. And the fact that we're using composite decking means that doing this step will add longevity to our framework, which is exactly what we want, because these days composite decking lasts longer than the framework underneath it, which is a good and bad thing, but we want to make sure our framework lasts as long as possible. And as you can see, very sturdy, so let's get to decking.
We of course have our existing decking, which I actually don't quite know the exact model or quality it is, but I did go to our local lumber yard and matched it almost to a T. This is a TimberTech Kona color, which matches almost near perfectly. And as you can see, the height difference between the existing deck and our walkway is exactly the same, which is exactly what we wanted. So let's get these boards cut down to size.
As I noted before, size does come into play here because these boards are 16 feet long, and therefore we can get a perfect 6 boards out of one piece. That's of course 6 boards at 32 inches long. And the one key note that I have for everyone, especially if you have to do repeated cuts at the same exact size, is make a stop block. You can even make a stop block out of a trusty 5-gallon bucket, and it really does make the cutting process a lot easier because you don't have to measure. I'm very careful with the placement and spacing of this very first piece, and in order to make sure it doesn't move on us as we're installing it, I do clamp it down to the appropriate location. Once it's properly secured, it's time to start fastening, and for fasteners, we're using this Camo Marksman Pro system. Now this is a really slick system that clamps down onto your deck board directly, and then you fasten these fasteners to the side of each board. Once we have our first board fully secured, we can take off our clamps and know good well that this board is not going anywhere. And at this point, once the clamps are removed, we can just start using our spacers. Now this spacer is a 5/16 inch spacer, which is a pretty sizable spacer, but because this walkway is going to have a lot of leaves and other debris falling on it over the years, I want a larger space between each board, which I find easier to clean over time. This little device provides the perfect angle for our fasteners, and it not only provides a very strong, secure hold, but it also makes it very seamless of a look because you don't see the fasteners unless you look to the side of each board. It's also a much cheaper option compared to a lot of other fasteners out there, and fasteners these days are getting quite expensive, especially for decking, if you haven't seen already. And like always, if you do want to check out these tools and materials that I'm using in this video, I'll make sure and leave a link in the description box below. As I work my way down the walkway, I just want to make sure that the overlap on both sides of the walkway is generally the same amount on both sides. It doesn't have to be perfect, but close. One thing I did notice when I got to a more drastic area where I needed to turn into the deck was that I needed to change up the spacing. On the right side here, I'm using my 5/16 inch spacer, but on the left side, I'm using the built-in spacer for my camo system. This actually just made it a lot easier to maneuver around these more drastic curves, and you can't really tell the difference on the spacing unless you get close to it. As I got to the point where I'm actually butting up against the existing deck, I did have to do some cutting. The easy way to account for this angle is to make sure you still have your spacers in set, and then place a mark on both sides of the board in which you need to cut. I did cut a small scrap piece first to make sure the angle was correct, and once we determined the angle, then I cut my actual board. I fit it snugly in place, making sure that all the spacing was correct, and then fastened it appropriately, along with the adjoining boards. And of course, we did have a very small section at the very end that we had to account for, and I just screwed it on top. I might try and fill it with the same color, but I don't know how I can attach this properly without drilling right into the dead center of it. Any suggestions would be appreciated in the comments section. But now that we have our decking installed, let's get to a little bit of trim work, and in order to do that, I want to make sure and guarantee that we have a flat surface to work upon, and that's where this very thin piece of metal comes into play that I'm clamping onto the side of our framework. In order to cut this decking at the appropriate location across the entire span, I'm actually using a bearing flush trim bit that has a bearing at the very bottom of the bit, which it rides up against the metal, and therefore it's cutting the same exact plane across the entire span. This of course does make a bit of mess over the entire process, which I do clean up, but it provides a very clean seam across this entire area between all the unique transitions and movement on this deck. Now, in all honesty and full disclosure, I could have just made a very long rectangle for this space and this walkway, but I wanted to make sure we had something unique and different on this project. And if you're looking for a way to make a rounded walkway, this is the perfect solution for you. If you're not and you just want a very long rectangle walkway, then you don't have to worry about this step. But it was a very nice way to finish off this beautiful walkway, which took a bit of effort to do, but in the grand scheme of things, it was only a couple extra hours to take on this endeavor. Also keep in mind that this router trick could come in handy if you are still doing a rectangular walkway, because you can still finish off the ends of these boards very nicely with this trim router bit. After I vacuumed up the mess that I made, I did bring in some mulch just to finish off this beautiful space. I find mulch as a nice aesthetic to this space, as well as providing a natural weed barrier, which comes in very handy in this area. Now, there were a couple areas where I got a little rowdy with the router, which is why I did a bit of sanding and cleanup, which just took a few moments to do. But now that that's taken care of, we are done. I really do love this entire walkway, and it's so extremely sturdy and functional for this space. It's an amazing transformation, and as you can remember, the before was quite treacherous and not inviting to mirror anyone, but now it's absolutely gorgeous in a one-of-a-kind space. I want to say a huge and special thank you to BuildTough for sponsoring this project. If you personally want 20% off their Tough blocks, all you have to do at checkout is type in the promo code BYOT, of course. And I must say, that is truly one beautiful, sexy beast of a walkway. Oh, and I almost forgot, we added a new member to the BYOT family. Meet Hank. Now that is one very cute, sexy beast.